Hi folks, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Payal and I am a traveler who also loves to meet people. And I think a blend of both is where this concept of melting pot has come about. In my Melting Pot series, I will be talking to lots of inspiring people from different parts of the world and also from different cultures, whom I meet during all my travels. The common factor between these folks will be the desire to follow their passion and make it a way of life. So step into this melting pot and enjoy the chats. Hi listeners, welcome to another episode of Melting Pot, a series of conversations, as we all know, with very diverse and passionate people who, in my opinion, are also change makers, and they come from all parts of the globe. My guest today is Brad Vanstone. Brad is, in my opinion, again, truly a change maker. And I like the way he also refers to Mother Nature as our CEO. I'm really curious to know more about that. A very quick introduction. Brad started off by building and growing businesses to setting up a business making cheese from home because he found that many plant-based cheese alternatives in the supermarket were not great and it was not really easily available. And of course, he himself switched to a plant-based diet. So thank you so much, Brad, for joining me very early in the morning. I know it's in Amsterdam, but I'm really happy to talk to you on Melting Pot.
Thank you very much for having me and for the very kind introduction.
No, it's all true. So yes, Brad, where does your story begin? Are you originally from the UK?
Yes, originally from the UK. So I grew up in Brighton, but my family's actually from the West Country, which is where the name Willicroft comes from.
I see. And that is the company one of the recent companies that you've founded, right?
That's right. That's the plant-based cheese business.
Oh, okay, great. So when you clearly, you know how to grow businesses, because when I researched you, I saw that you first founded a media company in the UK called The Tab. And then you moved that to the US as well?
Yes. So I must say I didn't found The Tab, but I would like to think I definitely helped get it going in the US. So I joined with the UK part about 2 years after it had started, and then helped to grow it out in the US. So we basically looked to remodel what we'd done in the UK out in America.
And what is The Tab all about? Is it it's a media company, but what?
Yeah, so I think most students can probably relate to this. It was basically set up to replace the on-print publication. So most campus newspapers are pretty dry and they do actually have really good circulation, but it's more of a project for the journalist writing it than for the actual reader, whereas good journalism's kind of the other way around. So what we wanted to do is basically digitize that and to also make the stories a bit more kind of tongue-in-cheek and a bit more in line with what was really going on behind the scenes at university. So rather than talking about new buildings or new faculty members or the debating society, we were more talking about what was going on off campus. So yeah, the parties, the sports fixtures, all of those kinds of things, as well as unearthing a couple of scandals as well on campus. So
interesting. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and the idea was it was kind of self-run by the students on the ground. So it was very kind of autonomous, and it was quite easy to kind of scale across campuses once you got it going.
Okay, so basically you empowered the students to essentially try and do different things within that space and try, and it makes it interesting for them as well. Otherwise, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
it's just drab news which people probably wouldn't even want to, they wouldn't want to, young people don't want to really waste their time reading
Mm.
stuff that, yeah, so no, that makes a lot of sense. So what happened after the tab? Where did you head next?
Yeah, so after 4 years with the tab and 2 years out in New York, my partner got a job here in Amsterdam. And so we moved over 4 years ago. And that was a good chance for us to generally reset because New York is a pretty, well, it's an incredible place. But it is, you don't necessarily get to think about much other than just keeping keeping on the same track. So on moving here, we started to watch a lot of documentaries, I guess, and kind of became a lot more aware of climate change and the implications that our personal lives were having. And we saw that if we were to change one thing, it was going to be our diets, basically. And so we started to eat a mainly plant-based diet. And that was actually quite an enjoyable and actually wasn't too difficult an experience. But there was one exception, and that was cheese. um, and I think that was for many reasons. So firstly, it was probably my favorite food. But also the quality of the replacements were really kind of lacking behind where replacement meat and milk was. So even 4 years ago, you had some brilliant products on the shelves in most supermarkets that were replacing meat and milk. But for cheese, it was, yeah, a totally different story. Very unhealthy, the replacements, not really replicating cheese in any way other than maybe appearance. And yeah, as someone who loved cheese, it was very tricky to switch from what I'd had in my past to that. So my grandfather was actually a dairy farmer. So Willicroft that I referenced at the start, that was his, my grandparents' farm down in Devon. And he taught me how to make dairy cheese. And so I had the kind of basic understanding of how to make it from him. And so I was basically applying similar nutritionals, but with a kind of plant-based ingredient base and looking at similar processes to dairy cheese making. And that got me, well on my way. So that was kind of how it all began.
So how long was the experimentation for before you decided that, okay, now we're ready to roll?
So down tools after 6 months. So I was still doing another job for the first 6 months, and it was very much a kind of weekend project. And I actually reduced my days to 3 or 4 days a week with the previous role. But there was one fairly formative evening where I had some friends around, and it was the first time someone else had tried it other than my partner. And they were really, really enthusiastic. And the great thing about Dutch people is they're not going to give you enthusiasm that isn't real. So if they thought it was good, then in their eyes it was good. So that gave me the confidence to go on.
I guess with the Dutch and the cheese, I mean, it's sacred to them, right? So
yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I think a lot of countries lay claim to being the biggest cheese lovers, but the Dutch are right up there. So that's certainly true. But then I basically had about a year-long period where I was primarily focusing on the recipes, but also getting it out there to the first customers. And at that point, it still could have gone in any direction because I had no funds. It was very much kind of door to door. I was doing everything myself, so producing, packing, selling. But it was a really beautiful time. I mean, Amsterdam has some incredible markets, and it's a very good place for this kind of project. So I really enjoyed that period. There was, obviously a lot of hard work and some trickier days, but yeah, sometimes I look back and think, God, transport me back to there for one day, because those markets were pretty special.
Were you producing the cheese back in Devon at the farm, or were you doing it in Amsterdam at home?
Well, if we have this conversation in 5 years' time, hopefully the answer is yes. But for now, it was initially out of my apartment, so it was quite the operation. I had 3 fridges in the hallway at one moment. I used to use the balcony as a fridge in the winter because the temperature was consistently below 2 to 7 degrees. Then I had a couple of 100 kilos of nuts in the attic. It was pretty crazy, but and then there was never any space to make anything other than cheese in the kitchen. But it worked, and given I was just selling at markets and a few stores, it was totally fine to kind of start that way, I guess.
And so what about the farm in Devon that you mentioned? Are you using it for anything at all?
So the farm used to be a dairy farm, and the last cattle left there at the turn of the century. But my grandparents have had people leasing the land pretty much ever since, and it's really the hub of the community. It's almost like a village hall or a village shop. There are people coming in and out every hour almost. So it's been semi-active, I would say. But my grandparents were just both passed away actually in the last year or so. So the farm is still in the family's hands, but we're now kind of thinking what we do next. And what I would love to do there is some of our wider regenerative projects. So we're looking to really control our supply chain longer term. And I think across all food, regenerative farming is probably our best bet at building a food system that can genuinely sustain us and sustain the planet. So we would love to put something up on Willicroft farm, but at the moment it is, it's as it was, basically a lot of open fields, and it's really beautiful up there. You can see the 2 national parks that are in Devon from the top of the hill. It's one of the highest points in Devon, and to kind of east you can see Dartmoor, and to the northwest you can see Exmoor on a good day. So it's beautiful.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the countryside is always special when you're driving. Yeah. So I mean, I completely get that. So coming back to your cheese, how many different varieties have you managed to put together? That's one. And 2, in terms of packaging, now obviously initially you were doing self-packaging, and so did you design the packaging, or now in the initial stages, and now is it any different? Are you still doing the designing of the packaging, and where does the packaging get done? Basically, please talk more cheese.
How long have you got?
Plenty.
Nice. So first up, we've got 8 retail ready plant-based cheeses. So we've got 3 different types of cream cheese, a plant-based fondue, which was kind of how we made our name initially, a grated sort of Parmesan style cheese, a Greek white, which is essentially a feta, and then a couple of sauces to cook with, so a cheese sauce and a truffle sauce. Then for food service, we've got all of those. Then the Dutch love bitterballen, so it's kind of a bar snack. Then we also have a mozzarella style, a cheddar style, and a couple of others coming. So the maybe interesting thing to note with those, or all of those cheeses, is that initially we started producing with cashews. So there's basically 2 types of plant-based cheesemaker on the market currently. One are the type that I first described, that kind of got me into this. So these are the mass-produced palm or coconut oil-based plant-based cheeses. That because they are so intensive on those 2 main ingredients, they don't really have a lot of flavor outside of it, and they haven't really been made in a kind of traditional way. They are doing really good volume, so must give them that, and they have good distribution. But there's not really a great deal of thought behind emissions, taste, all of the kind of important things that we hold dear. Then you have more artisanal producers, and a lot of these folk are making fantastic alternatives. The process is a little bit lengthier, and it's quite expensive often because of the types of ingredients, and the shelf life is often quite short. So for kind of small health stores, they are perfect. But in terms of getting wider distribution into supermarkets, there's quite a lot of limitations there. So we basically looked at these two models and thought, okay, we need a kind of hybrid of the two. We want to kind of solve my initial problem, which was finding good quality plant-based cheese at mass retail, but we don't want to go down that first route. So what we've done is we're actually moving away from cashews onto white beans, because the white beans, we can firstly get them more locally over time, so we can grow them locally. But also they do have reduced costs, and most importantly, the emissions are far lower. So we've done some life cycle assessments, which is basically where you look at the total emissions across an entire supply chain. So from the moment you put an ingredient in the ground to the point at which that ingredient ends up with all other ingredients as a finished product in the hands of the consumer. And we found that our initial cashew-based cheeses, they produced less CO2 than the dairy cheeses we were replacing, but not as much as we wanted. Whereas when we switched to beans, that was where we were making a big, big change. So we're going to be putting the emissions on all of our packaging next year. And we've got an impact report, which is going to ascertain everything I've just kind of run through. Also coming out, that's this year, actually, that report. So that's the cheeses. Then in terms of packaging, we've kind of gone back and forth a lot with packaging over the past 2 years. And I would say this is one of the most frustrating parts of the business, actually, because we've really tried to find a sort of sustainable option, one that can either biodegrade or has low emissions or is partly produced by some form of plant. But every single time we do try and make a good call, it then leads to implications elsewhere. So for example, we're unable to seal the pack, or it doesn't biodegrade as the company suggests it will. So we're waiting for a great option to come along, but we've moved back to plastic at the moment. And the reason we've done that is because we can see that we can make bigger gains with emissions in our supply chain. So actually, for a food product, about 10% of emissions are packaging, which is still a lot, but it's not as extensive as I think we all think it is. So it's not to say that it should be ignored, but it's I guess it's a question of priority. And as soon as we have an option that we can switch to, we will. We're always on the lookout. So if anyone listening is in the packaging world, please get in touch. But that's kind of where we're at with packaging. The material we're using is very easily recyclable, so it is still relatively responsible, but it's not where we want to be. Then I think maybe you wanted me to discuss the production, maybe, because that's always a massive hurdle in food. So many projects, I think, do start the way we did, and then you've got a choice of, do you outsource your production or do you keep it in-house? And the primary option is always to keep it in-house, because you just have greater control over everything. And I think the quality that you kind of have from the outset is always going to be the highest quality, rather than passing it on to someone else. But that comes at great cost, keeping it in-house. So I think most people move on to a co-producer and then back to producing on their own. So that's kind of the journey we're on. We've got a kind of co-producer at the moment, and we've had a decent amount of success there. I think we definitely want to automize the process a lot more than we are currently. And I think we will be taking some steps to bring certain cheeses in-house over the next couple of years. and then the full range longer term. And certainly when we go to a new country or new continent, I should say, whenever there's water in the way, we'll look to produce in-house. Yeah, I guess that's where we're at with production.
You're listening to a fusion of stories recounted for the first time ever by some fascinating people from across the globe with me, Payal, on this very unique and special podcast series, Melting Pot. And you co-produce and the co-production company, house, whatever you may refer to them as, they are also based in Netherlands.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay. And have you opened a store retailing, or is it still, word of mouth, or how is it? How's the distribution basically?
So we firstly have our own store in Amsterdam. So that's also the office downstairs, store upstairs. Because one thing we've always wanted to do is to grow the space, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of great artisanal producers. And I think people's perception of plant-based cheese at the moment is really low. So we wanted to put all of our kind of favorite companies under one roof. So we of course sell Willicroft cheeses there, but we also sell about 30 other plant-based cheeses there. And then a few things that go with it. So natural wine and super nice kind of gluten-free plant-based pastas and all sorts of other delicacies. So that's been brilliant for us, because we can have people in the store and really talk about our wider impact goals and values. And they can also see that actually there's some amazing plant-based cheeses out there. Not just Willicroft, but a lot of other brilliant companies doing really good things. So that's the store, but that's as much a kind of a way of us communicating our impact as it is a sales point. So the bulk of our distribution comes from a couple of retail partners. So we recently launched Albert Heijn in the Netherlands and Belgium. So that's the biggest retail chain in the Netherlands. And then they have a decent reach in Belgium, but they're not quite as big there. Then in the UK, we recently launched Waitrose, Whole Foods, and then a few kind of organic stores. So Planet Organic, As Nature Intended, and a few other spots. So the bulk of our distribution is through retail. We definitely have plans to be more food service orientated, but at the moment, it's just tricky, obviously, with the pandemic. So that'll come later next year or the beginning of the following.
So has it impacted your business, or do you think that this is, so are you, say for example, in Amsterdam, are you doing deliveries because that's what, selling stuff online, or have you sort of tweaked the model a little bit, or not really?
Yeah, we definitely tweaked a few things. I definitely caution it, me saying it's affected us too much, because we are in food, and the pandemic did heighten for a lot of people the importance of eating healthier, and there were many themes that were kind of put forward which ultimately are positive themes for what we're trying to do. So I think it's affected everyone in different ways, but I definitely won't kind of sit here in 2 years' time and say the pandemic was the reason for XYZ. It's just for us specifically, because I think we were quite fortunate. But I think the main thing we did was put the store online, which was really awesome for us actually, because initially we just had the storefront, and now all of a sudden we could ship to Belgium, Germany, a couple of the Scandinavian countries, and now France and Austria and Luxembourg. And we probably would have done that, but definitely not at the speed that we did.
Yeah, so you basically were compelled to fast forward because which is sometimes not a bad thing, because
no, sure.
because otherwise you can say, you sort of sit back and say, okay, it's on the cards. And
Exactly.
no, so that's awesome. I mean, I know the pandemic has, like you mentioned, hasn't been good for everyone, but no, I think and I agree with you that a lot of people have, because of the conditions and having to be home, and they
Yeah, yeah,
have considered food. They have looked at health
yeah.
in a very positive way. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that there have been a lot of positives that have come out, not just for your business, but I'm saying also for the way people have started to think. Yeah, which is good. Sometimes you need that. You need a bit of a shake up.
Yeah, that's it. You can't realize what's important. I think my favorite story out of the whole pandemic was the recent vaccination. One of the people that first came up with it was a couple that moved. I think they moved from Syria to Germany a few years ago, and this is a classic kind of immigrant story. And they moved to Germany, and then they discovered one of the cures or one of the potential cures for COVID. So we have all of this talk about immigration and the negativities, but this is such an amazing example of why we should be,
Should
thinking
be
about
more open and more tolerant.
exactly.
Absolutely, because it
Mm,
doesn't matter what part of the world you come from.
mm,
That's not
yeah,
important. Yeah. I mean, what's important is the skill set that you come with, your
mm,
talent. I mean, all of that should not really be ignored. It should be recognized and
yeah.
appreciated. So yeah, no, absolutely. So what is your favorite plant-based food? Today, everyone's talking about impossible and beyond, right?
Yeah.
So are there other alternatives, and what is it that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, what I think, well, there's kind of, I think, two journeys you go on when you switch your diet. So first up, I think you immediately look to replace everything. So if you had a dairy milk, you have a plant-based milk. If are making a certain dish, you swap out the meat for the plant-based meat. But actually, what I think is really important over time is to move your cooking and your food in a different direction. So actually now we don't really eat a great deal of plant-based meat because we just find that there are so many amazing vegetables or grains or whatever we're making that can be equally as delicious. So I think the alternatives are really important to get people switching, and then also or to help people go from, say, having meat with every meal to having it less, so maybe half the amount or whatever it might be. And then for someone who is eating fully plant-based, if they do get a craving, they've got an amazing option. But that being said, I still definitely do eat some plant-based meat from time to time. I would say my favorite plant-based burger is a company called Moving Mountains. They're from the UK. It's absolutely delicious. But actually, if we're replacing meat, I actually prefer jackfruit.
Yeah.
Just find it to be really, really healthy, and you can really season it with anything. It just holds flavor so well. And then in terms of, I do drink a lot of coffee and tea. So obviously do need plant-based milk, and we still use a decent amount. And actually coming out of the UK, there's some amazing smaller plant-based milk companies, like a company called Devon Garden and Hidden Figures. So yeah, those guys are doing great things. But I mean, the quality of what's coming through now is staggering, and so across the board. It's really cool to see how it's popped and how quickly the quality has risen.
Yeah, I feel that there are more and more people there's a lot of awareness over the past couple of years, and there are more and more people who are moving to this kind of food habits, and yeah, which is quite interesting. And then when you get into it, then you like you mentioned jackfruit. Growing up, you probably would not even have considered it to be edible, let alone wanting to cook it and eat it. So yes, I mean there are absolutely spot on that there are so many alternatives and people are discovering things, and because you need to also keep in mind a balanced diet, so you need the
Yeah.
right amount of protein, you need the right amount of calcium,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's important to do this whole experimenting, and then it doesn't necessarily mean that you like everything that you
Yeah.
try. So then you eliminate, and yeah, so
Exactly.
it's quite interesting. It's like, a new learning.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, we totally saw it as that. I mean, it was so exciting to really discover like Vietnamese food, and we started making a lot of Southeast Asian curries and stuff, and that was just such a fun exercise, discovering all of these new and wonderful fruits and veg, and yeah, these new ways of cooking, and yeah, it was very exciting. I loved it.
Yeah, I know it is. So, what happens next in terms of currently you've mentioned that you're retailing out of some of the European countries, and you
Yeah.
now are retailing out of Whole Foods and Waitrose back in and some smaller organic places back in the
Mhm.
UK. But what about going beyond the borders of UK and Europe?
Yeah. So I think we've kind of earmarked the end of next year to do a few trials. So the countries we're particularly interested in to start with are Israel and some of the neighboring Middle Eastern countries, and then definitely the US. Very interested in India as well, but I think that'll come probably 2023. So end of 2021, we want to do pilots in the Middle East and America. And from there, if those pilots are a success, so we'd probably look to launch in 1 or 2 retailers for 6 months to a year. Then we will look to set up probably actually a new company in those places and produce locally, because our supply chain we can definitely localize, and I think it's really important that our environmental values are the most important kind of driving forces for everything we do. So that's kind of a plan, or the plan for distribution. Then we really want to start creating kind of wider change in the space. And the way in which we're going to do that is, firstly, we've got our first impact report coming out this autumn, which will detail all of our emissions. I kind of briefly touched upon this, but what we want to say to other plant-based startups is it's really important that if you're talking about impact, you got to put numbers behind it. I think there's a lot of buzzwords out there, and there's a lot of kind of goodwill surrounding words like sustainability, but until you know how sustainable something is, it's dangerous using that word. And so we really want to encourage other people to really measure their impact, because then you can make so many fantastic changes. So for us, a massive learning was swapping out the cashews for the white beans. And I'm sure we're going to find other holes that we can now improve. Now we've got these figures. Then we also want to start actually working with the dairy industry to actually help it transition, because so many conversations between plant-based projects and dairy farmers can be quite tricky and quite tough and kind of
Sensitive as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
100%, and unnecessarily so. It's very kind of them against us mentality. And I've always felt that your best place to make change if you're actually sat at the table with someone having a conversation, as opposed to an argument from a distance. And so we've actually got a lot of ways in which we can do this. We are quite well connected to a lot of farmers, both through my background, but also through the kind of partnerships we've been setting up here. And the first thing we want to do is start growing one of our base ingredients here in the Netherlands on dairy land. So we're actually putting that project together as we speak and hoping to do the first we're hoping to sow the first seeds next spring. And what that will basically show the dairy farmers is that there is another way outside of solely producing dairy. There are other incomes, there are other methods. And if this pilot is a success, we can then scale that and help other farmers transition, because I just have no faith that the EU is able to do that, to be totally frank. What they have kind of released in the last year in terms of agricultural policies is absolutely mind-numbing. Then from an activist stance, that is what we're going to be fighting, a lot of these really archaic, outdated EU agricultural laws and financing. So yeah, I would say those are kind of our main goals and ambitions. A lot of it stems from what we can do together with others in the space, as opposed to just Willicroft on its own.
Yeah, just being the lone crusader, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. This has been really interesting for me to hear, and you clearly have a lot on your plate, and all for good reasons. So I wish you all the very, very best, Brad, and I'm going to follow your story, that's for sure. And who knows, one day you will also be in Singapore. So
yes, actually, I meant to mention Singapore as one of our test places. We've actually had a lot of interest from Hong Kong and Singapore in the last 6 months or so. So that has to be on the horizon as well.
Great. So we look forward to that. So thank you once again, Brad, for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day, because mine is coming to an end, but yours has just begun. So yeah, look forward to speaking with you again.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thank you. Brad's love for cheese, sustainable living, and taking care of our planet was great to listen to. He has clearly made it his mission in life to contribute to healthier living and helping the planet by also making changes to his way of life. I wish him all the success and will be closely following his story. Hope you are enjoying listening to Melting Pot. I will be back with another episode next week. Until then, this is Payal signing off. Do stay safe and, more importantly, stay healthy.